My name is Claire Monroe, and at 33, I discovered something I never thought possible. My own mother could try to end my marriage with a single phone call, even before it truly began. It wasn't loud at first, just a simple moment that changed everything. I called her one Tuesday evening while standing in the kitchen of the apartment I had worked 7 years as a structural engineer to afford. I told her I was getting married. Her first response was only one question. What does he do? I answered honestly. I said he was a plumber. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the world itself had paused. For seconds later she spoke again, and those words never left me. She said, "A plumber? You will disgrace this entire family." Then she hung up without another breath. That was it. No discussion, no second chance. Just judgment delivered like a final verdict. Not one member of my family came to the wedding. I adjusted my veil, forced a calm smile, and walked toward the altar while half the room remained painfully empty. 3 days later, my phone lit up with 97 missed calls. By then, I already understood why they were calling, and what had changed in their minds. That was the beginning of a story I never expected to live. At 33, I was no stranger to pressure. I worked in structural engineering, building stability into things that others would trust their lives to. But nothing prepared me for the instability inside my own family. My mother, Diane Monroe, ruled our home like it was a carefully staged performance. Every Sunday dinner felt like an audition where appearances mattered more than truth. She had rebuilt her life after my father left, turning pain into control. He had walked away years ago, choosing another woman with wealth and comfort. After that, my mother made one silent promise to herself. She would never be pitted again. Everything she did afterward was about image, respectability, and status. My sister Lauren understood that system well. She had already played her role perfectly, marrying into what my mother considered success. Her wedding had been large, polished, and carefully presented like a public achievement. It wasn't just a ceremony, it was proof that our family had made it. So when I opened a small cedar box that once belonged to my grandmother and saw her handmade wedding veil, everything inside me shifted. It was simple, delicate, and real in a way nothing else in our family felt. My mother didn't admire it. She immediately asked where I planned to hold the ceremony, as if love needed approval from a venue calendar. That was the moment I started to understand the difference between appearance and meaning. My grandmother had married a man who worked with his hands, and their life had lasted nearly half a century. There was something in that I couldn't ignore, even if my family already had. 2 weeks later, I called my mother again to tell her about Daniel. I had rehearsed every detail. How we met on a municipal waterline project, where I handled structural inspections and he led pipe installation. The first thing he ever said to me wasn't casual conversation. It was a technical question about beam tolerance and thermal expansion. It caught my attention immediately. But my mother never cared about that part. I told her he had worked his way up from an apprentice, that he now ran his own infrastructure company. None of it mattered. She heard only one word, and that word decided everything in her mind. When I said, "plumber," her voice changed instantly. It became sharp, final, like a door locking from the inside. She repeated the same accusation again, saying I would disgrace the family. Then she ended the call just as quickly as before, leaving only silence behind. I stood there holding the phone, staring at nothing, realizing she had already made her decision about my future. When I tried calling back, my sister answered instead. Her tone carried no surprise, only distance. She told me my mother wouldn't be attending the wedding. Not just that, she said she would rather skip her own funeral than watch it happen. I asked my sister something simple. Had she even met Daniel? Had she asked anything about him as a person? His answer was no. She said she didn't need to know more because she already understood what a plumber meant in her mind. That was the first time I hung up on my sister. Later that evening, I went to Daniel's home. It wasn't extravagant, but it was solid in a way that felt intentional. Everything had purpose. Nothing was for show. On his mantel sat a small brass pipe coupling, worn and aged, clearly kept for a reason I didn't yet understand. When I asked about it, he didn't turn it into a story of pride. He simply said it was the first repair he ever made that actually held. He was 17 at the time, fixing a leaking system no one else could solve. No exaggeration, no drama, just fact. I didn't realize then how much that would reflect who he was. A few days later, my Aunt Ruth came to see me. She was different from the rest of the family. Quieter, more grounded, less interested in appearances. Over coffee, she finally explained what I had never fully understood about my mother. After my father left, my mother didn't just lose a husband. She lost status, identity, and the way people looked at her in public. 4 years, she lived under quiet judgment from the community. That experience changed her. She rebuilt herself not emotionally, but socially, through perfection, control, and presentation. Lauren's wedding became her proof that she had recovered. Every detail of it was carefully chosen to show success to the world. And now, in her eyes, I was undoing all of that by choosing someone she believed didn't fit the image she had built. Ruth made it clear without needing many words. This wasn't about Daniel's job. It was about my mother's fear of returning to a version of life she had spent decades trying to escape. That understanding didn't excuse anything, but it explained a lot. So I sent the wedding invitation into the family group chat. It was simple, direct, and honest. No attempt to impress, no hidden message. I just told them they were welcome to come. No one responded. Not even a reaction. Not even a single word. The silence that followed was louder than any argument I had ever heard. Daniel didn't talk like most people when something important was coming. He didn't rush details or try to impress anyone with predictions. He simply said things in a calm, careful way, as if every word needed time to settle before it could be trusted. That evening on the porch, he only said that things might get loud soon. When I asked what he meant, he just shook his head and said it wasn't secrecy, only caution. Some things, he believed, should speak for themselves when they were ready. I learned not to push him. Over time, I understood his rhythm. He didn't announce life before it arrived. He waited until everything was certain, then spoke. That quiet confidence told me more than any explanation ever could. Around the same time, local news began running small segments I barely paid attention to. Reports about aging infrastructure across the Midwest filled the screen while I folded laundry or checked emails. Pipes from decades ago were reaching failure points. Entire systems needed replacement. Federal funds were being redirected into large modernization projects across states. A reporter stood in front of a treatment facility explaining how public-private partnerships were becoming the new backbone of infrastructure development. I remember glancing at the screen only briefly before returning to my routine. But one detail stayed in my mind longer than expected. Billions were being allocated to firms capable of handling massive, multi-state upgrades. At the bottom of the segment, a statistic flashed across the screen. Nearly half of Ohio's municipal water systems would require major overhaul within the next 5 years. At the time, I didn't fully connect it to Daniel. I only remembered him mentioning multi-state coordination and long federal timelines during his quiet phone calls. Something about it felt large, like a machine slowly turning in the background of everyday life. And yet, I still didn't see the full picture. That same period, Brad lost the state contract he had been chasing. I heard about it indirectly through industry talk before it ever reached my sister. His company had been competing for a major water infrastructure expansion project, but the contract went to a firm with stronger capacity and deeper municipal experience. Brad's name didn't even make the final shortlist. Not long after that, Lauren cancelled her kitchen renovation plans. Officially, she called it a design change, but the truth was simpler. Funds were being reversed, deposits withdrawn, expectations adjusted. The image she had been carefully building started to loosen at the edges. Brad reacted the way many people do when pressure builds faster than stability. He leaned into loans, extended credit, and tried to cover gaps with risk. From the outside, it looked like confidence. From the inside, It was imbalance waiting for correction. I didn't feel joy watching it happen. I only recognized what instability looks like before collapse, because I worked in systems where structure either held or it didn't. Lauren's posts became quieter. The perfect captions slowed down. My mother sent rare updates about small things, but never asked about my life, my work, or the wedding approaching. The family chat I was in remained silent, while the one I wasn't in, somehow I imagined, was probably active without pause. All of that was background noise compared to the fact that my wedding was only days away, and Daniel had started spending more time on the porch each night, speaking carefully into phone calls that always ended with the same calm pause. The week before the wedding, my mother invited me to lunch. She made it clear Daniel was not included. It was framed as something gentle, almost traditional, but it carried the same quiet control she always used when she wanted to guide a situation without saying it directly. We met at a restaurant in Ridgemont, the kind of place she liked because everything there matched her idea of order. Lauren was already seated when I arrived, her phone resting face down beside her plate, lighting up every few seconds with notifications she pretended not to notice. My mother ordered for all of us before we even spoke about anything meaningful. She filled the silence with updates about neighbors, gossip from the salon, and small stories that didn't require response. The entire conversation was carefully shaped to avoid anything real. For nearly half an hour, there was no mention of Daniel. No mention of my wedding. No question about my life at all. Then finally, she leaned back and spoke in a softer, controlled tone. She told me the door was still open. That if I ever decided to come back to my senses, they would be waiting. The phrase wasn't an invitation. It was a correction disguised as concern. I asked her what "come to my senses" meant. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. The meaning, in her mind, was already settled. At that moment, Lauren's phone lit up again. A group chat preview appeared on the screen. I didn't mean to see it, but I did. And in the seconds before she picked it up, I read enough to understand there was another conversation happening. One I was not part of. The chat name matched ours, but the members did not. My mother, Lauren, and Brad were all there. I wasn't. The messages were short, casual, and sharp enough to cut through anything unspoken at our table. "She's actually going through with it," Lauren had written. "A plumber in front of people." "I can't even say it at book club," my mother replied. Brad added something about betting it wouldn't last long. And then my mother's final message appeared clearly on the screen. Cold, certain, and final. She said she didn't even know what he really did, and that I was throwing away everything she had built for the family over a man with a wrench. I didn't react. I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't interrupt the moment. But something inside me shifted permanently. It wasn't anger this time. It was clarity. The kind that arrives when confusion finally ends and the structure of something becomes visible for what it really is. Lauren returned, smiling lightly, unaware that anything had changed. My mother continued the meal as if nothing had happened. I followed the rhythm, said the right words, and finished lunch like everything was normal. But it wasn't. That night, I told Daniel everything. He listened without interruption, without judgment, without interruption. When I finished, he didn't rush to fix it or react emotionally. He simply held my hand for a long moment and asked one question. What did I want to do next? For the first time, I realized I didn't have to keep proving anything to people who had already decided my value. And in that silence, I made my decision. On every news channel, Daniel's name was now everywhere. Reports, interviews, and breaking updates repeated his story like it had suddenly become important to the world. But inside our home, there was only a quiet note left behind on the table. It was simple, almost casual, yet it carried more weight than anything on television. The note said he would be back late and that I shouldn't check my voicemail. At the bottom, just 3 words: I love you. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt unreal how normal life still sounded while everything outside was shifting. I sat at the same table where we had eaten pizza from a cardboard box just days earlier. The phone kept ringing again and again. I didn't answer any of it. Not out of anger alone, but because I already understood the pattern. Every call was the same message dressed in different urgency. None of it was truly about me. 2 days later, my mother appeared at my door without warning. No call, no message, no hesitation. Just Diane Monroe standing on my porch, dressed carefully, holding a casserole dish like it could repair damage if presented correctly. Her makeup was fresh, her expression controlled, and her breathing carried that familiar rehearsed calm she used when preparing a speech. I let her inside because it was raining, not because I expected anything to change. She sat on the couch and placed the casserole on the table. Her eyes briefly moved to the empty space on the mantel where the brass coupling had once been displayed, and in that moment I could see her thinking, calculating, adjusting the story in her mind. She began softly, saying she knew things had been difficult. She admitted she wasn't perfect, but quickly shifted the tone toward justification. She said she had only been trying to protect me. That fear had guided her decisions. That everything she did came from love, even if it didn't look like it. I stayed silent. She continued, carefully shaping the conversation like a familiar script. She said family should always stand together. That distance was unnatural. That she wanted things to return to how they used to be. As if how they used to be had ever felt like safety instead of control. Then she changed direction. Almost seamlessly, she brought up Brad. She explained that he had been struggling and that his company had been going through a rough period. She said it casually, as if it were unrelated, then suggested that Daniel's success might create opportunities for collaboration. It wasn't subtle. It was not an apology. It was an opening strategy. The casserole wasn't an offering of peace. It was a carefully disguised request for access. She hadn't come because she missed me. She had come because she saw a connection she could use. Not long after, Lauren reached out again. Her message arrived with warmth carefully placed inside it. Words like miss you, proud of you, and we should meet appeared where silence had existed for months. She suggested coffee, just the two of us, and signed it with a heart emoji that felt more like familiarity rehearsed than affection felt. We met a few days later. At the cafe, Lauren acted different. Softer, more attentive, almost cautious. She asked about my life for the first time in years. She complimented small things she had never noticed before. She even mentioned Daniel, calling him impressive in a tone that sounded newly learned. Then, without pause, she shifted into business. She mentioned Brad had prepared something she called a capabilities overview for Daniel's company. She said it wasn't formal, just an introduction. She spoke about his experience, his crew, his reliability, as if reputation alone could replace qualifications. I asked her a simple reminder. I brought up her earlier words, how she had once said she would rather miss her own funeral than attend my wedding. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled it off, saying she had been emotional, that she didn't mean it that way. She said I knew how she could get sometimes, as if rewriting the past was just another casual correction. Then she repeated the same phrase I had heard before. Family helps family. It sounded different now. Not like belief. More like negotiation. I didn't reject her outright. I told her I would think about it. I didn't plan to follow through, but I understood the value of time. Time reveals intention more clearly than confrontation ever does. That evening, I told Daniel everything. We sat on the porch as fireflies moved through the yard. I explained the visit, the tone, the shift, the quiet return of old patterns dressed in new language. Daniel listened without interrupting. He didn't react quickly or emotionally. He simply absorbed it the way he did everything, carefully, fully. When I finished, he asked the same question he always did. What do you want to do? There was no pressure in his voice. No suggestion hidden inside it. Just space. I admitted I wasn't sure. Part of me wanted peace. Part of me wanted distance. Part of me wanted to believe that people could change if given enough time. He nodded, accepting all of it without judgment. Then he said something simple. That whatever I chose, he would stand with me. Not in front of me. Not behind me. Just with me. That was all. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about that difference. My family had always offered decisions wrapped in expectations. Daniel offered none of that. Only support without condition. And for the first time, I started thinking not about how to fix things, but about what I actually wanted to allow into my life going forward. A week later, an invitation arrived for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The first phase of Daniel's infrastructure project was about to go public. It was small in scale in terms of ceremony, but large in significance. Local officials, engineers, press, and stakeholders would all be present. Daniel didn't say it directly, but I knew immediately what it meant. If my family heard about it, they would come. And I was right. They arrived exactly as expected. My mother entered first, composed and confident, greeting people she barely knew with practiced charm. Lauren followed, smiling carefully, scanning the crowd for approval more than connection. Brad stayed slightly behind, observing, measuring, waiting for an opportunity. They moved through the event as if it were an introduction they had always been part of, as if their absence from the past had never existed. Then the ceremony began. The mayor spoke. Garrett followed. Then Daniel stepped forward. He didn't speak like someone presenting success. He spoke like someone describing responsibility. He talked about systems, about water access, about the people who never think about infrastructure until it fails them. Then he mentioned his start, small jobs, early failures, and a single repair that taught him what reliability actually meant. No exaggeration. No performance. Just truth. When it ended, applause followed naturally. Afterward, during the informal gathering, Brad made his move. He approached Daniel through me, trying to position himself as a necessary connection. He spoke about experience, subcontracting, and opportunity. He framed everything as collaboration. But Daniel didn't engage. Not because he was dismissive, but because he didn't need to. When Brad turned to me directly and tried to push the conversation forward, I simply reminded him of something he had once said, that he thought of my husband as someone who unclogs toilets. His confidence cracked for the first time. At that moment, a reporter approached me for a brief comment. She asked how it felt to see Daniel's work recognized at this level. Then she asked something that changed the direction of everything. Did your family always understand the scale of his work? I looked at the crowd. At my mother, standing close to Daniel for a photo she had positioned herself into. At Lauren, already filming for social media. At Brad, pretending to belong in conversations he had just inserted himself into. And then at Aunt Ruth, quietly seated, present without expectation or agenda. And I answered honestly. My family was invited to my wedding, I said. Only one person came. I continued, calm and steady. I said my mother had told me Daniel would disgrace the family. I said my sister had said she would rather miss her own funeral than attend. I said no one had ever asked who Daniel was beyond a job title they misunderstood. The room didn't react loudly. It reacted quietly, the kind of silence where people realize they are hearing something they cannot undo. Then I turned to my mother. I asked her simply which one of us had actually brought disgrace. Not as anger. As fact. The question landed like structure settling under weight. No drama. Just consequence. For the first time, she had no practiced response ready. And in that moment, everything shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently.